Have you ever found yourself standing in the checkout line? Maybe just went into the store for like milk and a loaf of bread, and you end up making this total impulse purchase based purely on how something looks.
Oh, absolutely. All the time.
Right, like you see it, it catches your eye, and your brain just immediately goes, I need that. Only to realize, maybe a few hours or a few days later, that you have absolutely no idea how to take care of this thing or, what it actually requires to exist in your life.
Yeah, it is an incredibly common biological override, honestly. We are highly visual creatures, right? So when we get seduced by the aesthetics of an object, our brains have this tendency to just completely divorce that item from its practical physical requirement.
Like we just ignore the reality of it.
Exactly. The form completely overshadows the function, or in the case of our discussion today, the environment.
Well, that tension, that gap between what we want to look at and what it actually takes to maintain it is exactly what we are pulling apart today. We are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating piece of writing from a gardening blog.
It's a great piece.
Yeah, it's an entry titled Notes on Gardening, Part 941, by an author named Ang, and it was published on June 30th, 2026. The specific focus of this post is a section called The Perils of Imported Bellflowers.
And the source text itself is brief, but what Ang is describing operates as this perfect microcosm of modern consumer behavior.
It really does.
It takes this seemingly mundane moment and unpacks the massive, kind of invisible systems operating right beneath the surface of a simple purchase.
So our mission for this deep dive is to basically follow Ang's grocery store discovery to its logical conclusion. We want to look at how a gardener's encounter with a beautiful flower turns into, like, a roadmap for mindful consumption.
Right, exposing the hidden realities of the ornamental plant market.
Exactly. And why respecting climate boundaries is just so crucial. We're looking at that critical pause between seeing something we want and actually deciding to bring it home.
Because that split-second decision in a retail aisle is, well, it's rarely just about you and the item. It is the endpoint of a massive global chain of events.
Okay, let's unpack the setting where it all goes down. It's brilliant because it's an environment we all know intimately. Ang is on a routine grocer run.
We all know that exact feeling.
Totally. You have your list, the fluorescent lights are humming, you're just navigating the aisles on autopilot. And then Ang's visual field is interrupted by this particularly intriguing plant. Specifically, Ang notes being drawn to its bell shape.
Right.
Later, Ang identifies this as a bellflower, or scientifically a campanula. But I'm looking at this interaction, and I have to push back on the premise just a little bit.
Okay, how so?
Well, a bell shape is nice, sure.
Yeah.
But why is a simple geometric shape so captivating that it literally stops a person in their tracks during a mundane chore? Like, it's just a shape.
It's a fair question, but context is doing all the heavy lifting in that moment. Think about the utilitarian setting of a modern grocery store.
Right. It's not exactly a nature reserve.
Exactly. It is a place defined by right angles, barcode scanners, uniform cardboard boxes, highly predictable produce. When you're navigating that space, your brain is operating in this highly automated, low processing mode.
Just try to get in and get out.
Right. You are actively filtering out the visual noise just to get through your list. Then suddenly that sterile field is interrupted by something completely organic, asymmetrical, and biologically complex.
Oh, I see. So it's not really about the bell shape itself, it's about the shock to the system.
It is pure novelty. I mean, the bell shape of a campanula is this delicate evolutionary design meant to attract very specific pollinators in the wild, not a shopper looking for oatmeal.
That makes total sense.
But the contrast between the rigid environment of the store and the intricate biology of the flower, it triggers a massive spike in dopamine.
The feel-good chemical.
Well, yes, but dopamine is specifically the seeking neurotransmitter. It creates an immediate sense of reward and a sudden drive to acquire. The brain registers a break in the pattern and says, hey, pay attention to this. This is rare in this environment.
Which explains why the cognitive processing happens so far behind the physical impulse. Like, the dopamine hit comes first, you put the plant in your cart, and only later do you realize you don't even know what it's called.
Right, exactly.
I mean, you wouldn't buy a car just because it was a pretty sheet of blue and then look up later if it actually runs on gas or electricity.
Yeah.
But with living things, with plants, we skip the specs entirely.
We do. We treat living organisms in retail spaces as if they were just inert decorations. We strip them of their biological context entirely because the retail environment is designed to make everything look universally adaptable and, well, ready for immediate consumption.
But Ang doesn't fall completely into that trap. The visual hook sets in. Ang is fascinated by the bell shape, But instead of just tossing it in the cart, Ang introduces a bit of friction into the process, right? A quick research session.
A vital step.
And the reality check hits almost immediately. Ang reads up on the bellflower and discovers this massive disconnect. This plant is native to temperate and cooler climates, and Ang's local climate is very clearly not that.
And that tiny bit of reading acts as a biological circuit breaker. It interrupts that dopamine loop we were just talking about.
Right.
We instantly move from the aesthetic appreciation of the flower to the hard environmental reality of its existence. It forces the consumer to acknowledge the organism's actual native habitat.
It's kind of like buying a beautiful heavy winter parka on a tropical beach vacation.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks amazing on the rack, but it is completely out of its element.
That is a perfect analogy.
But, I'm thinking about the modern consumer standing in the store, and a lot of people would just say, well, so what?
What do you mean?
Like, if I buy it, I'm putting it in my living room. I have air conditioning, I have a thermostat, I have a humidifier. Isn't the whole point of modern domestic life that we can artificially replicate whatever climate we want indoors? Like, if it needs cool weather, I'll just keep it by a drafty window.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that that is the exact trap of the microclimate illusion.
The microclimate illusion.
Right. A plant doesn't just experience temperature the way a human does. It is a highly complex biological system that relies on a symphony of environmental cues.
It's not just about the AC setting.
Not at all. It's the specific wavelength of the light, the drop in temperature at night, the microbiome of the soil, the ambient humidity, the seasonal shifts.
Wow.
I mean, temperate plants often require a cold dormancy period, like a literal winter, to reset their biological clocks. If you put a temperate plant in a perpetually mild, air-conditioned living room, you aren't saving it. You are chronically stressing it.
That makes me think of trying to run a high-end sports car on low-grade diesel.
Oh, totally.
Like, you can put the fuel in, and the car might look absolutely stunning sitting in your driveway. The aesthetic value is still there. But internally, the engine's mechanics are literally seizing up because the inputs are fundamentally wrong.
Exactly.
And with the plant, its vascular system, the way it moves water and nutrients, is basically shutting down because it's not receiving the correct ecological signals.
That captures the mechanism perfectly. The applied knowledge creates friction. The aesthetic desire wants the plant to survive on the kitchen counter, but the biological reality dictates that the vascular system will fail.
Which naturally leads Ang to wonder, and I think this is where the detective work gets really good. If this plant is biologically destined to fail in this climate, how did it even make it onto a grocery store shelf right down the street looking so perfectly alive?
Right, it shouldn't be there.
Exactly. This is where Ang starts reverse engineering the supply chain. Based on the cold weather requirement, Ang deduces two possibilities. This Campanula is either an imported ornamental plant, or it was specially cultivated in the highlands where the temperatures are significantly lower.
It is a massive leap in critical thinking. Just from a simple observation of a flower shape, Ang uncovers this massive, invisible infrastructure.
But let's pause and look at what that infrastructure actually entails. If a plant is being sold at your local grocer, the implicit promise, like the unspoken contract between the store and the buyer, is that this item works here, right?
I do assume so, yeah.
Why would a store dedicate valuable shelf space to a product that is biologically incompatible with the zip code it's sold in?
Because the modern global market specializes in what we can call impossible goods.
Impossible goods.
Right. The supply chain has become incredibly adept at using technology to completely bypass local ecological rules. Take the highland cultivation Ang mentions. Massive greenhouse facilities are built at high elevations, specifically to exploit the cooler temperatures in otherwise warm or tropical regions.
Okay, so they grow them up high where it's cold.
Exactly. This allows growers to produce temperate plants cheaply, but then they have to transport them down to the hot lowlands to actually sell them to people.
And how do they even survive that trip? I mean, you're taking a plant adapted to the cool mountains and dragging it through the sweltering lowlands.
Artificial dormancy and climate-controlled logistics.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they literally chill the transport trucks. They trick the plant's biological clock into thinking it's still winter.
Yeah.
The plant is essentially put into a state of suspended animation.
That is wild.
Right. It moves through the supply chain in the dark, in the cold, completely insulated from the actual environment it is traveling through.
Oh, wow. And then it hits the grocery store.
Exactly. They take it off the chilled truck and put it under the bright, warm, fluorescent lights of the grocer. And to the plant, That sudden shift in temperature and light signals a false spring.
A false spring.
It responds by blooming. It throws all of its stored energy into producing that beautiful, dopamine-triggering bell shape that caught Ang's eye in the first place.
So it looks vibrant and healthy, but it's basically running on the absolute last fumes of its stored energy.
Precisely.
The grocery store isn't selling you a plant that belongs in your environment. They're selling you a plant that they have successfully kept on life support despite your environment.
Yes, exactly. And the moment you, the consumer, put it in your cart and take it out into the uncontrolled reality of your local, non-temperate climate, that artificial life support system is unplugged.
And it just crashes.
The false spring ends, and the biological reality sets in. The presence of the item on the shelf acts as a silent, false endorsement of its viability. But Ang's deduction shatters that illusion. Availability does not equal suitability.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Knowing all of that makes the next step in Ang's thought process hit so much harder. After seeing the plant, feeling that initial rush of attraction, doing the research, and deducing this massive energy-intensive supply chain that brought it there, Ang makes a definitive choice.
The hardest choice for a consumer to make.
Yeah. Ang concludes that if the goal is to actually grow and cultivate something, this specific Campanula is, and I'm quoting from the blog here, probably not the right species for us to explore.
It is a complete rejection of the sunk cost of that initial aesthetic attraction.
And think about how difficult that is to do in practice. The item is literally right in front of you. It's likely very affordable since it's just an impulse item at the grocer. Everything about modern consumer culture is designed to reduce friction and scream at you to just put it in the cart.
Oh yeah, just try it. If it dies, just buy another one.
Right. Taking that 10-second pause to Google the plant and then actually listening to the data instead of your dopamine receptors requires a deliberate override of our consumer instincts.
And it brings up a really fundamental friction in how we interact with the natural world. When we buy an exotic imported plant that doesn't belong in our local ecology, we are essentially trying to force a living organism to bend to our personal aesthetic desires.
We're demanding that nature conform to our interior design.
Exactly. We fight this exhausting battle of attrition with the climate. We buy the imported plant, and then we have to buy the special imported soil. We set up misting schedules. We buy shade cloths.
Humidifiers, grow lights.
Right. We spend an enormous amount of time, energy, and money trying to make the impossible happen just so we can look at a specific geometric shape on our patio.
And Ang recognizes that this is an exhausting and ultimately disrespectful way to engage with cultivation. By prioritizing the plant's inherent biological needs over the gardener's immediate visual desires, Ang accepts ecological boundaries.
Which is what true cultivation is actually about. It isn't about dominating a species and forcing it to survive on the brink of death. It's about providing an environment where a species naturally thrives. If that environment requires a massive, artificial, carbon-heavy intervention just to maintain the illusion of health, the logical choice is to walk away.
It's acknowledging the limits of our own spaces.
Yeah.
Ang is basically saying, you are an incredible feat of evolution, but my environment will destroy you, so I'm going to leave you here.
It's a profound level of respect.
It really is. And what's great is that Ang doesn't just leave this as a personal anecdote about one specific trip to the store. Ang zooms out and turns this interaction with a single bellflower into a broader framework for the reader.
Right. The post evolves from a simple gardening note into a full critique of impulsive consumption.
So what does this all mean? Ang points out that this incident is a stark reminder that the market is absolutely flooded with imported ornamental plants. The final piece of advice is a hard rule. We need to identify and research them properly before getting them.
Not after they are dying on the windowsill, but before the transaction even occurs.
Right, before you hand over the money.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Ang is basically advocating for a dual perspective when navigating a modern retail environment. The first perspective is the consumer lens, the eye drawn to the bell shape, the appreciation of beauty. But that lens is incomplete and honestly often manipulated by the staging of the retail space.
So you have to actively force a second perspective.
You must adopt the botanical lens. You have to look past the flower's staging and ask objective questions about its biological viability. In a world where global supply chains intentionally mask the true nature and origin of what we are buying, relying solely on the first perspective makes you complicit in a cycle of disposable agriculture.
Disposable agriculture, that is such a harsh but accurate term. Because if we only use the consumer lens, we are essentially voting with our wallets for a system that artificially props up doomed plants.
Exactly.
We are telling the market, yes, please continue expending massive amounts of energy to chill trucks and run Highland greenhouses just so I can have a temperate flower sit on my hot porch for 2 weeks before it dies.
It's grim when you put it like that.
But it's true. When you strip away the pretty bell shape, you are left with a highly inefficient, wasteful system driven purely by fleeting visual gratification.
And that's why the demand to identify and research before getting them is so important. It's a demand to slow down the machinery of consumption. It inserts a mandatory wedge of critical thinking between the visual stimulus and the financial response.
Which perfectly summarizes the arc of what we've unpacked today. I mean, we started with the most relatable scenario possible, a grocer run for the essentials. But through Eng's observant lens, that ordinary errand cracked open to reveal the hidden mechanics of the Campanula.
Yeah, we looked at the powerful dopamine-driven allure of its shape and how the sterile environment of a store heightens that aesthetic shock.
And then we followed the biology, recognizing that a temperate plant's vascular system and biological clock are fundamentally incompatible with a hot climate, no matter how much air conditioning we throw at it.
Right, we pulled back the curtain on the supply chains. The highland cultivation, the artificial dormancy, the chilled trucks, all of it conspiring to create a false spring under the grocery store lights, tricking us into believing an impossible good is actually viable.
And finally, we examined the psychological circuit breaker required to override our own consumer conditioning, choosing to respect ecological boundaries rather than forcing an organism into a doomed battle of attrition.
It really is a masterclass in mindful consumption.
It is, and that is exactly why this matters to you, the listener, because this framework stretches way beyond gardening or bellflowers. It is a toolkit you can apply anytime you feel that sudden magnetic pull toward a beautiful object.
Think about fast fashion, think about exotic pets, think about out-of-season produce.
Yes, anytime you are drawn to something without knowing the literal or metaphorical climate it requires to survive, you are standing in Eng's shoes at the grocer.
Modern retail presents us with the products that have been intentionally stripped of their context. The burden of recontextualizing them falls entirely on us.
So, as we wrap up today's deep dive, we want to leave you with a thought to carry into your next errand. Next time you're out and you see a seemingly perfect, exotic item sitting casually on a shelf, completely divorced from its natural world, just pause for 10 seconds. Ask yourself, what invisible infrastructure, what global supply chains, and what massive biological haps were required just to put that item in front of you? And knowing the true cost of its survival is bringing it into your world really the right choice.